It's right up there with hockey and Medicare as a fundamental part of what it means to be a Canadian. Multiculturalism. But by accepting and respecting all cultures, has Canada also accepted certain cultural ideals that denigrate women? Our next guest says harmful customs and traditions have been hiding under the protective curtain of multiculturalism, and she says it's time to pull back that curtain to have a difficult conversation about what's been hidden. So let's do that. Joining us now with more, we welcome back Irshad Manji, professor at New York University and author of Allah, Liberty and Love, The Courage to Reconcile Faith and Freedom. And I say welcome back. You know why I say welcome back. Because do you know how long ago it was that you and Michael Corrin did that Friendly Fire segment here in this very studio?
You really want to start the interview this way, Steve?
I do, because first of all, you know, it's like welcoming back family.
And it's great to be here.
We did Studio 2. Were you in the first year?
Yep.
That's 1992.
And you saw all the hugs with the crew.
Yes, as you came in.
Exactly.
1992.
Yeah,
we
we've
did a
had
show
good
here together.
times, friend.
You look great.
Takes one to know one.
Me, not so much. Okay.
In the mirror, my friend.
Let's. I'm going to start by reading a little bit here just to get us off on the right foot, because Pierre Trudeau declared that we're going to be a multicultural country in 1971, and then Brian Mulroney in 1988 brought in the Canadian Multiculturalism Act. And here's basically a summation of the policy. The Canadian Multiculturalism Act sets out two fundamental principles. All citizens are equal and have the freedom to preserve, enhance, and share their cultural heritage. And multiculturalism promotes the full and equitable participation of individuals and communities of all origins in all aspects of Canadian society. That's the drift of it. Now, when that act was brought out 25 years ago, did it seem like a good idea when it was implemented? In your view?
Yes, in my view, certainly. And in fact, one of the reasons I think my family and I were even allowed to come to Canada as refugees back in 1972 from Uganda is that Pierre Trudeau was just unveiling the multiculturalism policy at that time. So we fit into his vision. But it's interesting that his vision was not the kind of multiculturalism that we are experiencing today. And here's what I mean. Trudeau actually pointed out that national unity, if it is to mean anything, he said, in the deeply personal sense, has to be founded on one's own confidence in one's individual identity. What we've got today is a lot of groupthink, not individuality, but groupthink. And this is what culture and celebrating all cultural differences can lead to. Some cultural differences ought to be celebrated. They're benign and even lovely. But other cultural differences, not so much. And we've come to a point, I think, in Canada where we're afraid. We're afraid of being called racists and bigots if we point out that not all cultural differences deserve to be tolerated.
For example?
Well, you know, as a Muslim, and as a Muslim who is often critical of the way in which my faith is being practiced, I love my faith as it should be, but I have issues with the way it's often being practiced, and one of that...
You're still a refusenik?
I'm still a Muslim who loves independent thinking and the culture of honor, the particular custom of group honor that has infected the way my faith is practiced means that women in particular are subject to violence if they transgress certain moral boundaries. And we see cases like this in Canada. Aqsa Parvez a couple of years ago, and the Shafia honor crimes in Kingston, exactly, even later than that. And I think it's time for us to point out that multiculturalism as an ideal is wonderful, make no mistake about it. But because it seeks to preserve, not challenge, but preserve all that is part of culture, what we sometimes find is that the ideal of women's equality bumps up against the aspiration to diversity. And I think that there's a way of going forward that builds on multiculturalism, but doesn't stay where we are right now.
Okay, but is it also fair to say, look, of course we love multiculturalism, but not the parts of multiculturalism that involve female genital mutilation, or not the parts of multiculturalism that involve honor killings? Yeah. That goes without saying.
No, it doesn't go without saying, not at all. Look, I'm an educator. I teach at New York University, and I come back to Canada quite often to speak with other educators about what's happening in their classrooms and sometimes even in the families of their students. And one of the things that educators tell me routinely is how fearful they are of starting honest conversations about the right and wrong of cultural preservation within their own classrooms.
Why
What
the
are they
fear?
afraid? Right.
Yeah.
They're afraid that parents will complain. They're afraid that peers will sort of dishonor them as being prejudiced. When, in fact, what they want to do is liberate the space, the classroom space, to be about critical thinking, about independent thinking, and not just about being nice to one another.
Lest we give the impression that this is simply quote unquote a Muslim thing,
Right.
we should add that there is obviously plenty of stuff that goes on in, for example, ultra-Orthodox Judaism or in Catholicism or in, you know,
and even in
make a list.
secularism, even
Or
in secularism.
sure.
The fact of the matter is that today we still have a reality in this wonderful country where, you know, boys who have a lot of girlfriends, for example, are referred to as players, and girls who have a lot of boyfriends, and even just friends who are boys, are often referred to as sluts. There's a clear double standard, and I think what's interesting, you know, when it comes to sort of peeling back the curtain, as you rightly pointed out, about multiculturalism, is that we know that the vast majority of cultures around the world are patriarchal, including our own. And by patriarchal, you know, I know it's a kind of an academic word, but it simply means this. It means that the desires and drives and demands of men in these cultures carry weight, more weight, and sometimes a lot more weight than those of women.
And long continuum.
Okay,
We're
it
at
is
one spot on it, and there are others that
and there are others,
right.
exactly right. But now when you pair that fact about living in male-dominated societies, when you pair that fact with what multiculturalism is about, namely preserving cultures, then in fact what you have is an ultra patriarchal kind of model where, you know, people are afraid to say, well, if I point out that there is something profoundly unequal about somebody else's culture and not just my own, I'm going to be told that I'm really un-Canadian for pointing that out, and really we should just shut up and get on with making nice.
Let me read this from the Boston Review. This is a long time ago, but yeah, good time to get a sip of water because I'm going to read something here. Feminism and multiculturalism may find themselves allied in academic politics, where white women and minority women and men face common enemies, great books, dead white men, old boy networks, job discrimination, and so forth. But as political visions in the larger world, they are very far apart. In its demand for equality for women, feminism sets itself in opposition to virtually every culture on earth. You could say that multiculturalism demands respect for all cultural traditions, while feminism respects only traditions that indeed deserve respect. Feminists might disagree about strategic issues, what needs changing first, or how to ensure one isn't just making things worse, or how to win over enough people. Feminists might even disagree about what true equality is in a given instance. But fundamentally, the ethical claims of feminism run counter to the cultural relativism of group rights multiculturalism. Okay, Irshad, lots to unpack here, so let's go through this. Can gender equality and multiculturalism peacefully coexist?
I do believe they can, but it's going to require, Steve, a big shift in our mindset as Canadians. And here's what I mean, speaking of unpacking words. I think we as Canadians have the opportunity to love diversity more than to love multiculturalism. People constantly confuse these two things, diversity and multiculturalism, but in fact, they're not at all the same.
What's the difference?
Right. So diversity is about more than just your religion and my skin color. Diversity is also about differences in thought, in opinion, in point of view. Now, here's the thing. Different points of view are naturally going to offend different people. So offense, and this is the hard truth that we as Canadians have to start grappling with, offense is not
such a bad thing.
Well, it's not something to be avoided at all costs. Quite frankly, offense is the cost of honest diversity. And that is something that educators, policymakers, and let's be honest, politicians are also very mindful of. They often won't go there.
You want to give an example of something that you're not allowed to say out loud in this country because of the concerns you just raised?
You know, I've already talked about the honor crimes and
Right.
the honor killings that do infect some communities in this country and have also infected Catholic communities in years past. But let me tell you about something that I experienced in the United States not too long ago in New York, where I live. I was at a school for girls, actually, girls at risk, meaning African American girls, Hispanic girls, and newly immigrant girls. And one of them asked this question, which I thought was just fascinating. She said, why is it that when a white guy calls somebody like me a nappy-headed hoe, he's a racist, which he probably is, but when my own brother, literally like my own biological brother, calls me that, he's an entertainer, he's a performer? Why that double standard? And you should have seen the other girls in class look at her, not in horror shock, but in relieved shock, as if to say, oh my God, you too? You've been thinking that too? And what we came up with was a vibrant conversation about what it means to own yourself, to own your own autonomy. Exactly, frankly, what Pierre Trudeau was talking about, but without the fear of speaking your truth.
So that's the explanation why it's okay for African Americans to call one another the N-word, but nobody else better do it.
Right, exactly. And of course, this girl is saying, but it's not okay.
But
then
it's
we
not
have to
okay.
call out our own brothers and sisters. And because if we don't, then in fact, we're practicing a different kind of racism, where we're reducing quote unquote white guys to their skin color and sometimes their maleness, and we're kind of letting our own pass with the same bad behavior.
We suggested in the intro that multiculturalism is, I think it's fair to say, is as much a part of what it means to be Canadian today as, you know, you gotta love hockey, our Medicare system, all that kind of stuff.
Right. And I do, especially now that I live in the United States. I certainly do appreciate our healthcare system that much more.
Have you signed up for the registry or whatever it is down there? Do you think Canadians are, as a result, hesitant to ask any questions about multiculturalism?
You know, it's interesting. I don't think that we're hesitant to ask questions in private. I think a lot of us have questions when other people are not expecting us to be on script. But again, in public spaces, people are afraid. And I'm here to say, if you love diversity, then also love the fact that all of us will have a different point of view, and that we should be willing to engage one another in that point of view. Why? Because if we avoid asking each other searching questions, then in effect, what we're doing is infantilizing each other. We're, implicitly treating one another like children. That's not respect.
You're too immature to handle a serious
Exactly.
conversation.
You're not my peer. You're not my equal. That's really what's at the bottom of it. And I'm saying that's not respect. That's disrespect. And moreover, that is dishonest diversity.
So the fear that you just referred to is based on what? What are we afraid of happening if we have this conversation?
Well, could you, Steve, tell me in all honesty, do you think that you could begin this conversation, that you have issues with multiculturalism, here's why, and be told that, yeah, it's fine to be hearing this from a white guy?
Yeah, that's not a great example. Sorry, I shouldn't say.
No,
it's
fair.
not a great
That's
example
fair.
because I don't give opinions on anything on this program.
No,
right?
but you see, I think that's a cop-out. If you
But it's true.
Okay. So let me put it this way. You know, when somebody was asking me the other day, what kinds of examples could I give? As I was going through a number of examples, he said to me, "You know what? I just realized as a white guy, I wouldn't be able to say this stuff.
I'm not allowed to say that.
I'm not allowed to say it. Now I could, but I know what would be coming my way if I did.
Which would be what?
You're a racist, dude. How can you possibly do that?
Consequences.
Don't you know? Don't you know that you're not allowed to go there? At which point, I think the white dude ought to be asking why. Why are you reducing me to my skin color? Let's engage. I'm not saying I'm right. I'm not saying you're right. Let's actually have an honest discussion about this and see where we both end up. And you mentioned when you were reading Katha Pollitt's quote, she uses this very sort of big scholarly phrase, cultural relativism. I just want to point out, relativism simply means that you stand, that you fall for anything because you stand for nothing. What I'm arguing for is pluralism, which is that you're allowed to make judgments, but make them your starting point. Don't make them your finish line. In other words, have your judgments, and then recognize that your judgments are contingent. They're temporary. They're based on two other things. They're based on having more experiences in life and hearing better arguments down the road. And therefore, you can change your mind. But if you come to the table with no opinions, then actually you're being dishonest, not just to other people, but also to yourself.
Yeah, no, you know I've got opinions, but it's just part of my job to shut up about them.
So I get it. I get it that in this context, you can't go there. But I'm just saying as citizens. And this is why I think that my argument is not ultimately about policy, and it's not ultimately about, about institutions. It's about us. It's about individuals. It's about people and what kind of a society we want in the next generation. Multiculturalism was great as a policy for the time that we were still coming to terms with what the world of mass immigration meant. We've come to terms with that in this country. Now it's time to go a step further and recognize that creativity and innovation, which is what I think the first 50 years of the 21st century will be about, that requires freedom of thought. And we can't really give that gift to our youth if we are telling them that they're only allowed to think certain things, and if they think other things, then don't express them.
Yeah, my hunch is, though, that today's youth are not inhibited in the way that perhaps our generation is, in as much as people see me and they might see a white middle-aged guy. They might see you and they might see a Muslim woman. They're way more colorblind today, right? Young kids today, they just don't see these kinds of...
No, I disagree.
You disagree?
No, quite the opposite.
Really?
I think that kids today have been socialized to see labels first. Now, that doesn't mean that they have issues with the labels. Of course they don't. But, if they see me as a brown, let's say Muslim chick first, then I think it stands to reason that they're going to assume certain things about, where I stand, that if they didn't assume those things, then maybe they'd be willing to ask me questions instead of assuming those things.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and that's what I'm talking about when I refer to innovation and creativity. We take those things for granted in a country as supposedly free as ours. But I think that we put limits on ourselves by first pigeonholing people. Witness how many times I'm told by young Canadians, I wish, Irshad, that people would stop asking me where I come from and where my family comes from. I'm not a South Asian Canadian. I'm not an Indo-Canadian. I'm a Canadian. Let go of the hyphenated stuff so that you can preserve your energy to ask me about the things that actually matter to me, like hockey.
Amen.
Who's my team?
But if it is impossible to do that, though, right? It's impossible for you to walk down the street and for people not to look at you and immediately say, attractive brown woman. It's impossible
Well,
not
I don't
to
know
do
about the attractive part. Believe me, it's possible for people not to do that. But I think you've got a really important point here. From an evolutionary point of view, it's true that we as human beings have not evolved to the point where we're beyond tribalism. However, that doesn't mean that we can't do better. And it doesn't mean that we can't celebrate each other's individuality as much as we celebrate that about our cultures or about our parents' cultures, which, deserve celebration. I think the key here is to ask questions about one another rather than to assume or make statements. And when somebody says something or even asks a question that is somehow offensive, instead of walking away muttering racist or yelling racist, why not actually engage? Exactly. And get to the heart of it in order to understand their unique point of view. Isn't that what diversity is about? So, the time for multiculturalism has gone. It's come and gone. And it was great while it lasted. But as citizens, and what is it to be a citizen? It is to participate. You can't do that if you are too fearful of saying the wrong thing. The time for us as citizens to go from multiculturalism to diversity has arrived.
Irshad, as always, you give us lots to think about. The name of the book is Allah, Liberty and Love, The Courage to Reconcile Faith and Freedom. Irshad Manji, always great having you back here in the studio. Thanks so much.
I look forward to our next encounter.
Amen.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.